This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel.
To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com.
You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know.
Everybody knows that all of the great Rebbes have a particular mitzvah that they're connected to. And Reb Hillel, a Parich, who observed many mitzvot and was connected with them on a very high level, there was one mitzvah that he was connected with more than others. That was the mitzvah of his peyot, or payas, the hair that's grown above the beard on the sides of a man's head, his earlocks. For some reason, the czarist regime of the day decided that it was a good idea to shave off the payas of all the Jews. And whenever a Jew was caught on the street, a policeman would come and cut off his payas. There were Jews left and right whose payas were being cut off. And one day, Reb Hillel is walking down the street, and a policeman sees him, sees his beautiful long payas, and runs over to him to cut them off. But Reb Hillel, he put his hands over his payas and did everything he could to keep the policeman from cutting them off. He was screaming for help, and nearby, there was a little Jewish tailor who always minded his own business, sitting in his shop. He hears the screaming of a fellow Jew, and having no idea that Reb Hillel was one of the greatest tzaddikim alive at the time, runs over and pulls the policeman off of Reb Hillel. The policeman looks at the two Jews, and he realized that they would overpower him, so he simply walks away, pretending nothing ever happened. Reb Hillel turns to the simple tailor, and he says to him, "In the merit of what you did, after 120 years, when you leave this world, you will be rewarded by being buried next to me." Now, this guy was a simple tailor. He had no idea who Reb Hillel was, and he figured, what's the great merit of being buried next to this guy? But okay, whatever. And he just goes back to work and puts it in the back of his mind. Many years passed, and Reb Hillel became the rabbi of Bobrusk, and every year he would travel around the provinces and the cities in the area, including Kherson and Yekaterinoslav, teaching Torah to the simple Jews, the farmers, the ones that were working the Jewish farms, and they admired him greatly. In the summer of 1864, when Reb Hillel was 69 years old, he became ill while he was in the town of Kherson, which wasn't far from Parich in White Russia, where Reb Hillel was from. And unfortunately, on that Shabbos, which was Shabbos Nachamu, Reb Hillel passed away. The next day, there was widespread mourning because everybody knew Reb Hillel. They admired him deeply. Thousands of people came to bury Reb Hillel, the great tzaddik. It continued to be a place where people would come and daven by the graveside of this great tzaddik. Many years later, it was a cold, winter, stormy day. And in the same town, in Kherson, there was a simple pauper who nobody knew. He was staying in the communal hostel, and he passed away. The head of the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, he looked at the weather. He says to himself, who knows this pauper? Nobody knows him. Does it really matter where we bury him? He didn't want to go out into the winter weather, and so he decided, without consulting with the rest of the Chevra Kadisha, that he would just randomly dig a grave in some free spot, wherever it might be, because, in the winter, it's not easy to dig in the ground. It's already ice, to get through the snow and the ice and to dig. It's not so easy, so he just dug whatever he could. The snow had covered most of the graves anyhow, and he buried the poor man. A few days later, everyone noticed that there was a new grave that had been dug right next to the place of the great tzaddik, Reb Hillel. And everybody wanted to know, who was this person that merited to be buried next to the great tzaddik? So people started asking around, and they found out that it was a simple tailor who had been buried there. Just somebody that nobody knew, who had no money and was living in the poorhouse. He wasn't a respectable member of the community. For sure he wasn't a tzaddik, and no one could understand how he could be buried next to the great tzaddik Reb Hillel. But now it was too late, because even though people wanted to pull him up out of the ground and bury him someplace else, it was forbidden according to the Torah. So now the mission was to find out who was this simple Jew who merited to be buried next to the great tzaddik Reb Hillel of Parich. So they found his ID papers, they found his name, the name of his father. They saw that he came from Parich, and they went there and they started asking around. And everybody they asked, they said, yeah, we know who he was. He was a simple tailor. He wasn't a scholar, didn't do a great deal of chesed. We're not exactly sure why he merited to be buried next to the great tzaddik. And then eventually they found somebody who had heard of the story of Reb Hillel when he was on the street. And the policeman tried to cut off his payas. And this simple tailor came out of his shop and saved Reb Hillel and saved his payas. And Reb Hillel told him, in the merit of what you did, after 120 years, you'll be buried next to me. And so even though the Chevra Kadisha, if they had a choice, they wouldn't have buried this simple Jew next to the great tzaddik, Hashem made sure that the blessing of the tzaddik came true. When it came time to bury the simple Jew, it wouldn't have mattered if it had snowed or not. He would have been buried next to the great tzaddik because of the act of chesed that he did all those years before. I want to thank the new supporters of this podcast, the Ben Avraham family of Pardes Chana, and especially to the Pellman family from Maryland and their children, Micha, Raviv, Tzvi, and Neora, and their parents, Erica and Ken. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. And of course, my kids, they listen to the stories every night, and on Shabbos they get a special live broadcast of the Chassidic Story Project. To Eliana, Rachel, Bracha, Atzlacha, and Levi Yitzchak, Magen Avraham, and of course Avigail, Sarah, Gula Shlema, who's always listening in the background, and any of my other kids that are listening, I love you, and thank you for listening to the podcast as well. Whenever I talk about the supporters of the podcast, my kids think that they're the only ones. So I want them to always feel like they're the only ones. Kids, you're my greatest supporters. And if you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast and this project, to help me spread the word further and to keep things going, please go to ChassidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. I love hearing from the listeners. Please feel free to write me. You can contact me through the website or through Patreon when you become a supporter. Thank you so much for your support and for listening, and I look forward to many more stories together.